Hello there. Donald Trump says a missing U.S. airman has been rescued after a daring U.S. operation inside Iran, though Tehran claims more U.S. aircraft were downed in the mission.
عملیات به اصطلاح نجات ارتش آمریکا.
The U.S. president says the airmen evaded capture for 36 hours, and he then threatened Iran to open up the Strait of Hormuz. I'll ask former White House official Douglas Lute about the direction of that war. Plus, could Ontario leverage nuclear energy and critical minerals in trade talks with the U.S.? I'll ask the province's Minister of Energy, Stephen Lecce, about his push down in Washington. It is Sunday. We are live. Thanks so much for joining us on this Easter Sunday. Donald Trump gives Iran 48 hours to cut a deal or open up the Strait of Hormuz. If that doesn't happen, Trump threatens, all hell will rain down on them. It comes after Wednesday night's national address where Trump said the U.S. military operation in Iran will wind down in the coming weeks, but not without intensifying strikes.
I can say tonight that we are on track to complete all of America's military objectives shortly, very shortly. We're going to hit them extremely hard over the next 2 to 3 weeks. We're going to bring them back to the Stone Ages where they belong. In the meantime, discussions are ongoing.
Since that address, attacks on both sides have ramped up, with the U.S. and Israel hitting a century-old medical research center in Tehran, steel plants, and a bridge near the capital. It's part of Trump's vow to hit Iran's bridges and electric power plants if its leaders do not agree to his terms to end the war. This past week, Trump also reignited threats to pull out of NATO after allies refused to engage in the war. Earlier, I spoke to the former United States ambassador to NATO, Douglas Lute, about the status of the conflict. Ambassador Lute, thanks so much for joining us.
It's good to be with you.
So the president has said a couple of things over the past week, particularly in his address to the nation, that the U.S. is very close to finishing objectives in Iran, but also says the next 2 weeks will involve intense military action. As someone that's worked very closely on wars in the Middle East, do you believe that the end of this war is in sight? Do you understand what the president is saying when he says those two things?
Well, I think he's conflating two parts of the operation, right? On the military side, the military objectives, so the Iranian Navy, the Air Force, the drone and missile capability of the Iranians, and the production facilities behind those military capabilities. That part of the campaign, I think, is nearing the point of diminishing returns. That is, that we have fewer and fewer targets that we've identified. And the ones we've identified, we've pretty much hit, and probably hit and struck again. So the military campaign is reaching sort of a logical conclusion. What is not concluding is the political end state that these military objectives should be connected to, but from the outset have not been connected to. So what we're really facing here and confronting is the disconnect, the strategic disconnect between the military campaign and the political end.
And so the political end, the part of what happens next, how much will the United States be involved in that part of what happens going forward?
Well, the president began, I think, by way of the speech the other night, to suggest to the American people, to prepare the American people that he was going to declare success on the military front and sort of walk away from the political end. And there are two looming questions here with regard to the political end. One is, what about the 1,000 pounds of highly enriched uranium that has remained essentially untouched by this most recent military campaign? And perhaps even more important to the global economy, what about the status of the Strait of Hormuz? So these would be unanswered, even though we could declare success on the military front.
So the Strait of Hormuz is obviously where other countries like Canada are not involved, but could be involved if there's a ceasefire in place.
Right.
What do you think needs to happen to get to that point, and how important will other countries be in making sure that the strait can open up?
Well, I don't think there's a military solution to opening the Strait of Hormuz. And here geography plays a dominant role. Geography, even in the 21st century, matters. And the fact of geography is that Iran has a dominant geographic position of advantage over the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, we can't deny that. And there's no military answer or response to that geographic advantage. So I think inevitably this means some sort of negotiation, some sort of compromise with the new regime in Tehran. And only then can the shipping companies, which rely on free and safe passage, have a sufficient confidence and pay attention to their insurance rates, right?
Sure.
And have insurance a sufficient confidence that they can pass to and from the Persian Gulf with safety.
This past week, the president also, again, suggested backing out of NATO. It was unclear to me whether that was related to his desire for some other countries to come in and sort out the Strait of Hormuz, or whether this is, again, something that we should be taking seriously. How seriously are you taking those comments, Ambassador?
Well, I take it both not so seriously and seriously at the same time. Let me explain. So, in a legal sense, there's a law in the United States that the president, as the executive authority in our government, may not unilaterally withdraw from NATO. So he has to, in legal terms, go back to the U.S. Congress and either receive a 2/3 vote in the U.S. Senate or a combined House and Senate act of Congress that supports the withdrawal. He won't get that legal authority to do so. However, and here's where I am concerned, he can do things as the commander-in-chief that essentially deflates or reduces the American role in NATO to the extent that, in effect, he causes severe damage, even though the U.S. remains a member.
Does NATO survive if the United States is not participating in the way that you're talking about?
So I think NATO survives, but it survives in a much depleted state, a much weakened, degraded state. And of course, for an alliance that depends on deterrence as its key factor, lack of confidence, lack of U.S. leadership, lack of U.S. commitment are serious blows.
NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte is going to be in Washington this coming week. He has sort of become what people call a Trump whisperer, as you know. He's been able to de-escalate a lot of times with the president. I wonder how much you think that meeting is important to try to get things settled a little bit, not only with the president, but in terms of geopolitics.
Well, it's typical for the Secretary General to make a trip to Washington as preparation for an upcoming NATO summit. Of course, there is a NATO summit in Ankara in July. So this trip was probably pre-scheduled before this most recent controversy. I think the Secretary General will try to steady the ship of state here, if you will, try to calm things down. But I think, frankly, the damage has been done. I don't think we can walk past the kind of rhetoric that certainly Canadians understand, but Danes understand with regard to the Greenland controversy, and now with regard to the war in Iran, many other NATO countries as well understand that this kind of lack of confidence, this kind of degrading rhetoric coming out of the White House can't be simply ignored. So there's no escaping that.
The coalition of the willing that was built to deal with Ukraine has now sort of taken on a broader, I think, perspective, and Australia is now involved. And I wonder if you see sort of a new security partnership emerging, not in the formal way of NATO, but if that's something that you're observing and what you think that means.
Well, I think this notion of a coalition or some sort of substitute for NATO is a natural reaction. So as NATO loses credibility and loses steam, if you will, there should be something that replaces it. The problem with the coalition of the willing, in my view, is that it's first a coalition, which means that members of this loose ad hoc grouping can come and go as they will. And then second of all, the willing. And the notion that nations will remain firmly committed no matter what, even in tough times, suggests that they may not always be so willing. So this is a reasonable response to sort of the lack of confidence in NATO, but it's not, the coalition is not something I think we can count on.
Former U.S. Ambassador to NATO, Douglas Lute, thank you for your time, sir.
Good to be with you.
The war in Iran is having an impact on costs here in Canada. Certainly, you are feeling it at the pumps as gas and diesel prices soar. The Gulf region, though, is also critical to global fertilizer production. The cost of nitrogen, a key nutrient for crop growth, has skyrocketed in Canada since the war began, just as farmers begin their planting season. Drew Spolstra is a farmer in Ontario, and he joins me from Binbrook, that is on the outskirts of Hamilton, Ontario. Nice to see you this morning.
Thanks for having me, Rosemary.
Yeah, and happy Easter if that's something you're celebrating today as well. Diesel prices have shot up, obviously, at the same time as gas, and we've been hearing about the surge in fertilizer prices. Tell me what you're seeing and how it's impacting your farm.
Absolutely. We're seeing impacts on both of those fronts already, both fertilizer and fuel. Farmers this spring will be heading to the field shortly, and under a cloud of real uncertainty. We're not sure what things are going to look like going forward for both fuel costs and fertilizer supply and costs. And so, we're having a lot of those discussions with our members and with government and with suppliers as well on what the future might look like. We've already seen those fuel costs double from last season, and pretty significant increases in fertilizer as well.
Give me a sense of what you're talking about in terms of numbers for your farm, for instance. How much more will fertilizer cost this year if the prices remain where they are?
Well, it's a little hard to determine yet. I mean, some retailers aren't even pricing fertilizer because they're not sure what their supply is going to be like going forward. We do believe that there's enough supply here for the spring season to get our crops in, but we're not sure about that replacement and what that cost will be going forward. So we have, lots of farmers have prices locked in going forward into the spring, but just that cloud of uncertainty on what things will look like going forward. It's a little clearer on fuel. I mentioned our costs have doubled since last spring season. So, what cost me $1,000 to fill up my tractor for the day last year is now going to be $2,000, and we don't have the ability to pass that cost up.
And I know that farmers are good at dealing with changing circumstances, whether it be weather or prices. I know that's something you're all kind of used to, but how unusual is it to have these kinds of challenges all at the same time?
Well, I mean, it's been a lot more prevalent over the last few years coming out of the pandemic. We certainly had that. We had the Russian-Ukraine conflict. Now we've got this conflict in the Middle East. So we've been dealing with a lot of uncertainty over the last, 6-7 years, and even before that with weather and market conditions. But I'll say we're getting kind of tired of it. It's been a long haul over the last number of years. Continued costs continue to rise, and we don't have any control over what we're getting for our products at the other end. So we continue to advocate to government for better risk management programs, for the tools that we need in our toolbox to continue to farm and grow food for people across this country and around the world.
As you said, you can't set the price. So just so I understand, does that just mean you just have to operate with loss and hope that you get some support from the government?
Well, we have to make sure we make good decisions on our farm businesses and that we do the best we can to be sustainable going forward. So, we do advocate for stronger risk management programs, for insurance-based types of programs, so that we're covered. And we can't sustain too many losses, so we need to make sure that we have those tools available in an event that our costs continue to soar and we can't make that up with the products that we're selling on the world market.
You're a farmer, but I know that you also talk to lots of farmers. You represent farmers. How are they feeling about things these days?
Well, I'd say they're a little on edge. Farmers are concerned about what's going to happen going forward. They're concerned about the sustainability of their businesses and the opportunity to continue to farm. They're concerned about their mental health and what that might look like as we go forward with all of this uncertainty. Farmers just want to go out there, grow their crops, and continue to feed people around the world, and really don't want to deal with all these headaches that we're seeing coming our way. So, we'd like to see some more certainty in the world if that's ever an option, and I think that'll provide some relief for farmers going forward.
If this were to get resolved, I mean, it is this is happening so far away, but having such a direct impact on you and then on others. If this were to get resolved in the next couple of weeks, would that have, has the damage already been done, or would you be able to make up the losses there, Drew?
Well, it would certainly help, I think. But, as we've always seen, prices are quick to go up and really slow to come down. So,
Sure.
20% of our costs are directly related to energy, fuel, and fertilizer on farm here in Ontario. And, we've seen those go up dramatically, as we talked about already, and they'll definitely be slower to come down. But the sooner these conflicts come to a close, I think the better for our businesses going forward.
Drew Spolstra, thank you so much for, I know you didn't get up early for me because you're a farmer, but thanks for making time for me on this Easter Sunday. Appreciate it.
You bet. Happy Easter.
Okay, you too. With the rising cost of gas and diesel, is the energy crisis becoming an economic and political challenge for the federal government? Is Ottawa doing enough to respond? Pierre Poilievre doesn't think so. Our Sunday Scrum is standing by. You're watching Rosemary Barton live.
It's time to lead. Lead for affordable gas, groceries, and homes. That's why today I'm calling on the government to suspend all fuel taxes for the rest of the year.
Opposition leader there, Pierre Poilievre, calling for a temporary pause on federal taxes on diesel and gas as a global energy crisis impacts costs here in Canada, too. How is Ottawa responding to the pressure, or is it? Let's bring in our Sunday Scrum. Nick Taylor-Vasey is the Ottawa Bureau Chief for Politico, co-host of the Playbook Canada podcast. Emily Nicolas, a columnist for Le Devoir. She's in Montreal this morning. Gary Mason, a columnist for the Globe and Mail, and he's in Vancouver. Thank you all for being here, particularly on a long weekend. I appreciate you squeezing me in. I should say that the Prime Minister was asked about the high prices of gas, and he said sort of, we'll wait and see. Maybe there'll be something in the spring economic update. I think Pierre Poilievre had a good point, Nick, because this is really an affordability issue, and he's trying to tap into it. Whether the policy response is the right one or not, I don't know. But what do you make of his call for action and then the government saying, maybe we'll get around to it?
Well, if Canada did cut the gas tax, they wouldn't be alone, right? European countries and others around the world are all sort of taking action to give people immediate relief. Because what the government might say is eventually we'll give a rebate. This is a sort of a popular Liberal government response to this sort of thing. But the thing about the rebate is it's retroactive, and people really can't wait. People are really, they're struggling now. When you go to grocery stores, you see what people are buying at the cash register. I mean, they're buying the cheapest food they possibly can, and then they got to go fill up their tank, and they can't do it. And so most economists will say that a rebate is the most efficient thing to do because it means that those who don't need to pay won't, and those who need relief will eventually get it. But speed's the problem here.
Yeah, and to that end, I mean, I think I saw, Emily, and you would know better, you're in Montreal, I think prices hit $2 in Montreal. They certainly have out on the West Coast where Gary is. But this is like this is not just a problem right now, it's a problem on top of another problem and another problem, and I wonder how or if Ottawa should act quickly on this.
It's a little bit of a brain issue in a sense that there is food, there is rent, and there is gas, right? Those are the three things that come to our mind the most. And I don't see that energy for renters. And I don't see that energy for food insecurity in the country. And so it's like we want to help the people with the car. Part of it is because we see the signs at the side of our street jumping at us with the big prices. I wonder if there were more solutions for food insecurity or for poverty in this country, if it was the price of eggs or the price of bread or the price of milk that had big red numbers flashing on the side of the road as well. And so this one is very immediate. It's on it's on the brain of everyone. Because of just the way that, you see it at the pump and it's just screaming at you from the side of the highway. But the affordability crisis is more complex than this.
Sure.
And there is that risk of helping people who don't need it and not helping people who do need it the most. We have a homelessness crisis in this country.
Yeah.
But it's not screaming at us in the same way. And so we really need to be smart about the policy aspect of it. But there's always that urge to act on what is the most evident rather than what is necessarily the most effective in actually relieving the crisis in this country.
Yeah, those are all excellent points. And Gary, as someone who is dealing with really high prices out there, this also may not, I don't know how this conflict is going to end, if it's going to be another 2 or 3 weeks, but it also may, things may smooth out in some ways. And maybe that's not the right place to put the government's attention in terms of affordability, as Emily points out.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. We don't know how long this is going to drag on for. And most analysts don't expect gasoline prices to drop immediately after the war ends. Right. We don't know, for instance, whether Iran is going to continue to, levy a transit fee to get oil out of the strait. But I just going back to this idea of Poilievre's, just to drop all gasoline taxes. Well, that they represent about $7 billion of funds for the federal government. So if you drop those taxes for the rest of the year, you're talking about like a $3.5 billion hole in your budget. Yep. I mean, where is that money going to come from? Are you going to scale back in other areas, or are you just going to add to the already ballooning deficit that the Conservatives are lambasting the Liberals over, quite rightly? So, and the other thing is, in BC, as you say, we have the highest gas taxes in the country, 63 cents per liter. That's a combination of municipal, provincial, and federal. And all that money is spoken for. I mean, there is there's no way BC is going to scale back any of that at the gas pump, because that money is spoken for in terms of infrastructure, transit infrastructure, all sorts of things. Sure. So, and the other thing I think, Rosie, finally, is that we don't know, this conflict may end, but it may have caused a recession, a global recession by the end of it. And so the government has to hold its powder to some extent to see what it's going to be dealing with when the smoke proverbially, finally clears, so they may have other issues that they're worrying about and having to spend money on.
Yeah, I mean, Nick, those are good points. I mean, as prices go up, that is beneficial to government coffers. And while you might want to give that back to Canadians, there may be other places to use it, to Emily's point as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Every dollar not raised by the government means that a social program that will also help people who need it doesn't have that at its disposal.
That's right.
But I think when you think about what Poilievre is proposing, he's doing the kind of pure Poilievre thing, which is saying, let's cut the tax on gas for the whole year. But around the world, the countries that are taking action are not all going that far for that long. So you could have a time-limited sort of measure that responds to some sort of short-term, get people a little further down the road without going to the end of the year.
The idea itself, I mean, Emily, just to go back to what you're saying, to give all that money back to people driving cars and farmers, like our friend that we just were spoken to, maybe that makes sense. But I would imagine that the Prime Minister is going to have to consider other things as well.
Absolutely. And amongst those things, there is the fact that the geopolitics of it, aren't we just making Donald Trump's terrible catastrophes just more sustainable by making basically, are we just enabling him by basically having all the Western governments cutting themselves off revenues as to subsidize Donald Trump's foolishness? Is that what we're doing? The second thing that we need to ask ourselves is, Pierre Poilievre doesn't want to have a tax break just before the end of the year. Obviously, this is just pushing the ball further down the road in terms of making a dent into the system and questioning oil taxes for good. And it's never going to be popular for the government to put the taxes back up. And so wouldn't be just creating a political problem just further down the road in a couple of months.
Yeah.
And then there is the question, I cannot still believe how rich it is for, during that same week, have the leader of the opposition question the high-speed rail train, and basically the idea that we should also invest in infrastructure that makes Canadians less dependent on their cars, and therefore the volatility of oil prices, which is always going to be a thing as long as the geopolitics is what it is.
Yeah, yeah.
And so and that has also been the case in Europe with the war in Russia, trying to invest in transitioning away. And this needs to be as part of the conversation as much as, immediate relief.
I got to go. Thank you all. Nick Taylor-Vasey, Emily Nicolas, Gary Mason, thanks for spending part of your Easter Sunday with me. I appreciate it. Stellantis is discussing building Chinese electric vehicles in Ontario after pausing production in 2025. The federal minister of industry says Ottawa will get its money back if the jobs don't come back.
We will get our money back unless they bring back production. And if they bring back production, it must be along with the union and the province supporting their plan.
What is the province doing to help with the trade war? I'll speak with Ontario's Minister of Energy and Mines, Stephen Lecce, after this. You're watching RBL. With the review deadline for CUSMA talks approaching and negotiations with the U.S. in limbo, Minister Dominic LeBlanc says the federal and provincial governments are collaborating.
All the provinces and territories and the Government of Canada have been working collaboratively to ensure that we protect the Canadian economy and Canadian workers.
Ontario's Minister of Energy and Mines was in D.C. this past week and met with a Trump official in Washington and championed his province's critical mineral resources as essential to the U.S. as they try to move away from China. I spoke with the Ontario Energy Minister, Stephen Lecce, about his trip and what could happen next. Minister Lecce, nice to see you again.
Thank you. Good to be back.
You were in Washington this past week. You met with lots of people, U.S. energy officials and others about, I guess, about trade, obviously, but a partnership potentially, and the things that Ontario has that the U.S. wants, whether it be nuclear energy and critical minerals. Tell me what the response was, what people were saying when you said, look at all these great things we have, and are you interested?
Well, as the province as the owner of the resource, I mean, we want to be out there profiling our advantages to the world when it comes to reliability. We just hosted the PDAC, the largest mining conference in the world. And I think the overwhelming theme that really resonated with industrial and democratic economies is that this province, this country, is the most reliable, ethical, democratic nation on earth that has the nuclear technology. We process 25% of global uranium. We are a true energy superpower when it comes to the first small modular reactor we're building in the Western world here in Ontario, and all the minerals and rare earths that the Chinese have a total stranglehold over that we have under our feet, and we now have new authorities to move with unprecedented speed to get them out of the ground. So the message really was, we are here to build a continental energy a new continental North American approach to energy security that helps us decouple away from China and build more at home. And we think that is in both national interests, and it seemed to have resonated both with Republican and Democratic leaders.
Well, there is obviously a global energy crisis right now because of the Strait of Hormuz and the fact that oil prices have gone up because of the president's actions in Iran, something that he talked about last week. Is there, has anything changed because of that, I guess is what I'm asking. Is the conversation changing with Republicans, with anyone around the president because of those realities?
My impression is there's a heightened level of concern. It could be both economic and political ahead of the midterms about the affordability crisis in America. I actually believe that there's a heightened level of anxiety amongst decision makers in the U.S. about how they can, really limit the increasing costs on everyday families. I think the election may pay a lot and may be part of the rationale for why there's a heightened level of attention and sensitivity. But our message was, we are here with massive capacities, be it petroleum for Western provinces or natural gas, nuclear fuels, critical minerals, rare earths, processing, extraction, downstream conversion. We are doing it all. And under what world would the Americans want to be beholden to the Chinese, who recently, over the past year, imposed brutal export controls on rare earths to help limit the American military and industrial expansion? And so the message was, look, you can choose confrontation. We're here with a message of collaboration. Let's pursue a continental approach to energy independence and security and lower costs for all families. And that affordability element, it was probably less focused on by us over the past year. I think it's an important hook to get their attention and get them to refocus on Canada as a solution to some of the broader geopolitical challenges the world faces.
This past week marks the one-year anniversary since the 25% tariffs on non-U.S. content and autos, which I realize is not your portfolio per se. But I do wonder whether you get the sense that there is any progress on these sectoral tariffs. The people that I talk to anyway say that things are constructive, but it doesn't seem like we're getting to an outcome. And I don't know if that's because people aren't willing to say that to me and aren't willing to say that publicly, or because everything has stalled. What was the sense you got?
I did not get the impression that the negotiation for the review has stalled. I mean, this is a 16-year deal. It's being reviewed at this point. And that's what the Ontario Chamber of Commerce and I helped emphasize in our mission down there over the past few days. The truth is, the federal government who's leading this work the impression I'm receiving from our meetings with the US is that there actually are good faith discussions happening in the background. They may not be talking about them, and that may be in the best interest of the province and country that they just get it done at this point after a lot of rhetoric back and forth. I think our economy needs certainty, and for large-scale investors sitting on capital, they need to know that their materials and products could enter into the US tariff-free or with an element of certainty on what the tariff may be. We're seeking tariff-free access into the US to help build out what has been a century of success. And I think when we reminded the Americans we purchased more US auto than the next 7 nations combined, including China, Mexico, and the UK, plus many others, it gets their attention. Like, I'm not sure the literacy in the US of everyday decision makers recognizing we are their number one customer by far.
Yeah.
And when we went out there, Premier Ford is in Houston, emphasizing to legislators as well as to state members and yes, state house members, and of course, business leaders, we're your number one client, your number one customer. We offer massive economic value. 9 million Americans woke up today because of Ontario's relationship, not even Canada's. I actually think it's a bit sobering for them. We have to get out there and sort of be relentless and somewhat hawkish in our posture to remind the Americans of our value as an energy superpower and a dependable ally. And that's what we've been doing as a province, what our premier is doing as we speak.
Yeah, the premier has certainly been hawkish. I'm not sure that the federal government has yet, but given that the critical minerals, to your point, are within the jurisdiction of the province, is that something that you think can be used as leverage? Are you prepared? Should the Ottawa be prepared to use that as leverage in these negotiations?
Yes, we should be using it as leverage. I think, well, I won't speak for federal strategy. I think it's one of these items that can be used as a closer. It can be used to help seal the deal. I reminded administration leaders, including when we met with a national security advisor in the White House a few days ago, following the review in this sequential order, completing the CUSMA review, then will enable us to do bilateral offtake deals with the U.S. One must happen before the other. And they got our point, which is we are aligning ourselves deeply with the feds on this matter. And so I do think the mineral element, the processing element, look, Rosie has a case study, nickel. Over 50% is Canadian. They have one nickel mine in Michigan, and we do all the processing in Sudbury. When you hear rhetoric of we don't need Canada, we don't need anyone, sure, but let's focus on the signal, not the noise. The signal is they actually need dependable access, and the Chinese own 75% of the assets and mines in Indonesia where much of this nickel is being extracted. We have the highest grade 99% purity in the province. The largest Western deposit on earth, you mentioned it, is in the Crawford mine, the Canada Nickel Company. So this is a huge opportunity to educate America on our plan to fast track. We cut the permits by half. We have a program in the Ring of Fire to get the roads constructed this spring, 3 years ahead of schedule. So the message to them is, look, folks, we mean business. We're moving fast. And if it's not you, there's someone else that wants our minerals. You're up in the Asia Pacific. So it's in your interest to land this deal so that we can get back to business and going back to the trading relationship that I believe has benefited both economies for a generation.
I'll just end on this, Minister. Obviously, part of the argument to the Americans is if you don't want to have to rely on China, come to Canada. However, the federal government has made certain deals with China in order to sort of expand trade there. The finance minister's over there right now. And now it looks like there is some interest by Stellantis in putting a Chinese manufacturer in their factory in Brampton. It doesn't seem like something Minister Joly is super keen on, given that she would expect them to follow labor code and the rest of it. And I don't think your boss is keen on it either.
Look, the Premier has been very clear. That would be an unacceptable proposition for the people of Ontario. Bringing essentially IKEA-made parts to the province to simply assemble, not manufacture, using Chinese components is not an achievement which we will support. We want our unionized workers and Ontario materials and supply chain to benefit, just like in our nuclear sector where 90% is made in Ontario. We want to see more value in the country. And that's the message we've shared with the feds. And we really hope that they will be clear to the company. We want to see real investment that creates real opportunities and jobs for many of the families who've been afflicted or affected by these indiscriminate and illegal tariffs by the U.S.
Minister Lecce, nice of you to make the time. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great Easter.
Canada's relationship with the U.S. continues to be front and center, of course, with that mandatory review deadline for CUSMA mere months away. I'll speak with a former U.S. Democratic presidential candidate turned independent about Canada-U.S. relations and if he's going to run for president again. You're watching RPL.
I love you too.
After Andrew Yang ended his bid to be the U.S. Democratic presidential candidate in 2020, he launched what he believed would solve a problem within American politics.
That is the Forward Party. It's an inclusive movement. You can be a registered Democrat, Republican, Independent.
For nearly 5 years now, Yang has been growing his vision of Forward, a third party that he says is necessary for American democracy.
You need more than two parties because
the two existing parties aren't doing a great job.
As part of his platform, he's pushed big ideas like a universal basic income and pushed back against the use of AI, saying it will take away millions of jobs. Andrew Yang outlines this and more in his book, Hey Gang, Where's My $1,000? Andrew Yang, thanks so much for joining me.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
You talk a lot, obviously, about your political. I guess it's not your past, but your attempts to run in the past. Your 2020 presidential run, how you campaigned to be the Democratic presidential candidate in your book. Since then, you've become an independent and you've started the Forward Party. Tell me why you decided to start a new party, a new political party.
Well, in Canada, you get it. And I talked to my Canadian friends who describe living there as living in the apartment above the meth lab, which unfortunately is what American politics can feel like, in part because there are only two parties. And so it's all black and white, us versus them. Meanwhile, problems just fester and get worse. So I concluded, by the way, about half of Americans now are independents. I concluded that you needed a different dynamic if you're going to address AI and some of the other big problems on the horizon.
Do you? I believe in the last election, though, you told people not to vote for a third party because it would lead to President Trump getting elected, which is what happened. So do you think that we are at like a sort of a turning point where Americans would now consider a third party?
Yeah, and that's borne out in the numbers. The two legacy parties are deeply underwater in terms of their approval rating or how people identify themselves. And the number of independents now just keeps going up and up. By the way, back in 2024, I also endorsed a guy named Dean Phillips who was trying to force a primary in the Democratic Party, in part because I wanted to keep Trump from winning re-election. And the Democratic Party essentially served the victory up to him by failing to have a primary, which is one reason why you need more than two parties, because the two existing parties aren't doing a great job.
Donald Trump has talked a little bit about things like nationalizing elections or taking over the midterms coming up this year. What do you make of that kind of rhetoric from the president?
It's very, very concerning because I don't think it's going to be confined to rhetoric, unfortunately. It's one reason why I badly wanted Trump not to become president again in 2024. His policies are quite unpopular. This war is unpopular. The tariffs, which I know in Canada, you guys felt very, very, very directly, so unpopular here in the US. And so what do you do when your approval ratings are in the high 30s? You talk about nationalizing elections, but he has some sympathetic ears around the country in state legislatures. So people take it very, very seriously.
I appreciate you mentioning the tariffs because that was going to be my next question. He's not only tariffed Canada, but he also has threatened Canada as the 51st state and other things. And the Prime Minister here has called this a rupture and said that the relationship is not and never will go back to what it was. Do you believe that the Canada-U.S. relationship is in some way fundamentally changed because of Donald Trump?
I think if you had new, sensible leadership, Rosemary, then things could change pretty dramatically in another direction. For example, if I were president, we would be welcoming Canadians with open arms. It pains me deeply that Canadians don't come south of the border to visit us because there are so many American sites and businesses that want that to resume or even increase from the previous levels. So hopefully we can get a president in that has that kind of attitude. And it's not just Canada. I mean, I have friends from around the world who don't visit anymore.
Who do you think is a viable alternative to, obviously, I don't think Donald Trump is going to push the agenda and try and run again, but you never know. So who is sort of the Democratic or third-party candidate out there right now who would be able to offer something different to the MAGA movement and to what Americans are looking for?
I'm so glad you included the independents in this, Rosemary. My number one draft pick in the independent lane is Mark Cuban, who, by the way, polls phenomenally well. The Democratic primary is going to shake out. I know a lot of those figures. I mean, Gavin Newsom right now is the front runner. Yeah. And Gavin's excellent in real life. He's going to be there the whole time. People shouldn't underestimate Gavin's staying power.
One of the other things that you write about and that you really care about is AI. You are very concerned that it could break the economy. One of the things that we are struggling with in this country and other places are as well is regulating AI. How do you do that, and how do you put the onus on tech companies to sort of behave properly? What kind of regulation or legislation would you want to see to prevent what you're talking about in the United States?
Oh, Rosemary, I'm so glad you raised this. And it's interesting for me to contemplate what Canada's legislators should do vis-a-vis these American AI companies. So we should take Dario Amadei's suggestion and tax AI itself to start paying for things like universal basic income. I have some friends in Canada who've been trying to make that happen, but it's common sense. I mean, you have literally trillions of dollars of value being hoovered up by these AI giants. And right now, the average American or Canadian is going to see next to nothing of that. So you have to change that. You have to try and address the major concerns that a family might have, which is, am I going to have a job? Is this going to steal my identity? Is this going to result in mass destruction? I mean, these are very, very real concerns. And right now, the joke in the US is that you have more regulations if you want to open a hot dog stand than if you want to launch an AI company.
Why do you think it's going to break the economy, though? Obviously, there would be productivity benefits in some ways if you incorporate AI into different segments of the economy.
Well, in the US, 44% of jobs are either repetitive cognitive or repetitive manual. There's 70 million white-collar workers, and let's say you were to get rid of 30% of those jobs, the middle class would shrink very, very dramatically. You'd have people graduating from college not being able to find jobs, which, by the way, is happening already. So if you play out what this looks like in communities around the country, it's devastating. And even if you look at something like the Great Depression, I mean, you were talking about, let's call it 20% unemployment. There is a chance that we approach that with AI.
I'll end on a political question, and I don't think that you're a former politician, so we'll see how you answer it. You talked about Mark Cuban there, but I don't think you've ruled out the idea of running for president again. What is the likelihood that that is something you are going to contemplate?
Well, Rosemary, thank you for asking. I get people asking me to run every day, in part because what did I campaign on in 2020? AI coming and taking our jobs, and it's now real. And so a lot of folks are saying what I warned about is shaking out, and what are we going to do? So it could be that a political run is in my future, and I don't regard myself as necessarily a former politician either.
Okay, Andrew Yang, we will perhaps speak again then. Thank you so much for your time, sir.
Oh, thanks for having me, Rosemary.
Advance voting is underway this weekend for 3 federal by-elections in Ontario and Quebec. Voters in Scarborough Southwest, Terrebonne, and University Rosedale can cast their advance votes up until tomorrow night. Polls open from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. Final results will come on April 13th. The Liberals are hoping they'll be able to secure 2 more seats needed for that slim majority inside the House of Commons. Starting at 8 p.m. Eastern, we will have special coverage of those by-elections hosted by me. We'll break down the fight over the ridings and what it could mean for the government if they secure a majority. I'm Rosemary Barton. Thank you for watching on this Easter Sunday. Happy Easter if you celebrate. See you back here next Sunday, if not before. Take good care.